Welcome back to Up the Villa today, joined by Ben Bowman for our Spurs v Aston Villa opposition preview. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, thanks, mate. All good. It's been a tough couple of days after the Palace loss, and we've got a big game against City tomorrow when we're recording this in the Carabao Cup. So, yeah, a lot of pressure kind of going into the Villa game, and I kind of still haven't really got over my level of being annoyed after the Palace one. So, yeah, but I'm all good though. I'm all good.
Yeah, defeats they do take until your next game to get over them, don't they? Really?
Yeah, exactly.
Some of them are really frustrating. So, Angie's second season, then I really want to get your thoughts on how were you feeling after the first and going into this season. So, as a fan, what were your expectations going into this season?
Expectations. Well, I expected us to kind of really put up a fight and go deep in the Europa League. Obviously, we're in very early stages of that. We won 3 out of 3. We haven't had our toughest opposition yet in that tournament, but things are promising. It's probably when you look at the competitiveness of the other teams going for Europe in the Premier League, going for those Europa League and Premier League and Champions League spaces. Sorry, Villa obviously included in that. You pipped us last year, and probably on the balance of it, deservedly so. And obviously, I think the way that you guys have kicked on in this season and kind of just picked up from where you left off is something that we haven't really done, which has been disappointing. But I'd say that's kind of more in terms of the results rather than the performances, because I actually think for the most part our performances have probably been better largely than they were last year. It's just certain things that aren't quite coming together in terms of clicking yet, and that inconsistency is a problem. But in terms of other expectations, I think, look, we're all desperate for a trophy. We are all absolutely desperate to win something. And like I said, obviously, we've got, but when we're recording this, it's Tuesday, we've got City in the Cup tomorrow. So to be able to go deep in a cup competition like the Carabao would be great. FA Cup as well by the turn of the year, because I think Angie's approach to the cup competitions last year was something that frustrated parts of the fan base, which may be a little bit harsh, because last year we went out the Carabao Cup very early on when he first came in. We went out to Fulham on penalties and we rotated a lot, and that kind of got fans' backs up. But there was so much else that was going on that was right at the start of the season. I think that kind of subsided a little bit straight away. And then when we got to the FA Cup, we got knocked out by Man City in the 4th round. So it was one of those ones where it was just a little bit unfortunate in terms of our domestic success last year in terms of the cup competitions. Obviously, it would have been nice to go deeper, but when we've got City in exactly the same situation in a different competition this year. But Pep's promised to rotate, so I'm holding him to that. But City's version of rotating is very different to a lot of other teams in the league. But yeah, I think it was just try and win a trophy, try and qualify for the Champions League, go one step further than we did last year. Obviously, it kind of came down to like the last 2 games, wasn't it? Really, obviously between us and yourselves. And I think one thing that I've got a lot of, obviously we were kind of in a battle last season, but I've got a lot of admiration and kind of respect for Villa in terms of like watching that, especially the Bayern game, but even the Bologna game last week in the Champions League. When you look at the squad that you've built, that squad building is so impressive, and I think that's something that we're still trying to get towards, having kind of that fully complete squad with a lot of different options and kind of game changers, which I think you've got a lot of. Like, I'm really happy with our first team, even though we are quite inconsistent, but you're looking at what you guys done. I mean, there's so much to kind of admire there. But yeah, in terms of expectation, it's hopefully try and break that trophy drought, I think.
Well, he said he wins stuff in his second year, so
bold, yeah.
Something's got to be coming. So yeah, this season, I think when you get to sort of like a 10-game period, you can kind of gain a little bit of a pattern of what's going on. But when I watch you and I look at a lot of the stats, your attacking numbers are just literally through the roof. You're literally behind Man City in pretty much every attacking metric, progressive passes, etc. So you are playing like some really, really good football. So how do you think the season's been so far?
If I was to sum it up in one word, I think it would be frustrating, just because I think we've shown this season in those performances, and I think it's borne out as well in the numbers that you've kind of just alluded to, is that ceiling for this team is really high. When we play to that level, like I said, there were moments in the season last year where we were blowing teams away. Obviously, that first 10 games, we got off to a flying start, 1-8, drawn 2, and we were top of the league. Whereas this season, obviously, we're not there yet. We're not there. But we've had a slightly harder start in terms of some of the results. And I think we've actually done better this season in comparison to those exact same games last season. Well, we certainly did up until the Palace game, because we beat Palace last year and lost them this year. But I think it's frustrating because the results have been inconsistent, and even in games that we've lost, or drawn on the first game of the season against Leicester. First half, we absolutely dominated them and battered them. And the second half, it was just like watching a different team. Brighton, of course, is the more extreme example of that because we were 2-0 up at half-time. And again, we just come off of that, just come into that game off the back of 5 wins in a row that were much needed because criticism was starting to kind of, or there was a lot of noise around Spurs, especially after the North London derby defeat. And that's kind of something you alluded to there with Ange, where he said, I always win things in my second season. And then that, like, there was a lot of scrutiny on Tottenham around that game and around that comment in particular, because it got some of our fans' backs up. Not me, but it got some of our fan base backs up. And the media naturally kind of they went at that. Because Postecoglou is a kind of prickly defensive, well, certainly not in his football, but defensive character. You know, I think in terms of where he's come from in his footballing journey, I think he's had so many questions about his kind of journey to this point. And it's kind of not, you know, if you look at someone like Emery, for example, Emery has got like a track record which is much more, I guess, respectable to the average football fan. And don't get me wrong, Emery totally deserves that. He's done brilliantly basically everywhere that he's been. And Arsenal, I think, was a sort of maybe right manager, wrong time type situation for Emery. But Postecoglou's done it a very different way. And I think sometimes there's a kind of patronising narrative in the media that doesn't really help him, which then makes him more defensive about his journey and about those kind of things about winning a trophy, etc. But yeah, the Brighton game was the perfect kind of example of the sort of problem at Tottenham, because when we're good, we are excellent and we can blow teams away. And I think we've seen that many times this season. And in some of the games that we've lost or drawn, things just haven't quite gone our way. We should have beaten Newcastle up there. I don't know how we didn't do that. We should have never thrown that game away at Brighton or at Leicester. Palace was the worst performance of the season because it was over 90 minutes where we just never really got going. And we haven't really seen that this year. But that inconsistency is what we are lacking to become that top side, to consistently get into the top 4. Because, like I said, kind of going back to the expectations, last year, obviously, Spurs and Villa were the main 2 teams battling for Champions League football. And obviously, with that potential 5th place, depending on how other teams perform in Europe, etc., it allows maybe more people in. But the level of competition, I think, has gone up so much this year, where that's where you can't afford to be sloppy in games like we were at Brighton and were at Leicester and were throughout the 90 minutes on Sunday against Palace, because teams will punish you. Whereas maybe 4 or 5 years ago, if this Tottenham side was playing to its potential, I think we'd be comfortable. We'd probably be more than good enough to be comfortably finishing the top 4 every year. But the reality is the Premier League is just not like that, and it's really not like that. So it's been frustrating, but I still am I'm still very much more on the positive side of things rather than the negative. This week is a big week, a really big week, because, like I said, a cup game against City. He can't afford to. I know it's against City, but it's almost like with certain sections of our fan base, Postecoglou can't afford to go out of the cup because there's this desperation, which isn't his fault because he hasn't foreseen the trophy drought before him. You know, he's not been here for us to win a trophy. And then Villa on Sunday is a huge, huge game. So it's a big week, and it's been frustrating so far this season. But I definitely feel like I still sit on the more positive side of the fence.
Yeah. So your style of play obviously is really exciting. The 2 fullbacks get a lot of sort of, everybody just enjoys watching that because there's not many teams that actually do that with sort of both fullbacks going into attacking areas. And, you know, you are always really exciting and fun to watch, and you've got some really creative players. So has Postecoglou changed anything from last season? I think when I've been watching you, Kulusevski's position now in that sort of centre, but drifting out wide, etc. He's, you know, that's something that I've spotted. And sort of Maddison a little bit. I want to get your thoughts on Maddison, because there's a couple of games that I've watched that he gets took off at sort of like half time, and I feel like does he sometimes go missing a little bit when it's not going all your own way?
Yeah, that was definitely, I think, that was one of my biggest critiques of him last season. But to be fair to Maddison this year, I think obviously kind of, I'll come to that in a sec, because I think it leans into how we have actually changed as a team tactically. You mentioned the fullbacks at the start. Our fullbacks last year were tucking into midfield a lot, inverting, getting into central positions. But this year, they're kind of very much more staying higher and maybe wider and out of the way of the build-up a little bit more, because naturally we've moved Kulusevski into midfield from that right wing position. I think if we were inverting our fullbacks as well, there's not enough space in the middle of the pitch. And I think it's made us a better team on transition, made us better on the counter-attack, brought the best out of Brennan Johnson as well, who's someone that's kind of struggled a little bit to really, really win over a lot of people and impress. But, you know, his numbers are very impressive. And I think this team's kind of built up for him now, or geared up for him to score goals. So Kulusevski moving inside has kind of been a revelation for Spurs. But it was one kind of I think we saw coming a little bit, because there were moments last year when Maddison got injured around this sort of time, really, again in the Chelsea game last season, and was out for 3 months. I think it was 3 months. And Kulusevski moved into that number 10 position, but he was playing more of as a sole 10 rather than him and Maddison, who are now kind of dovetailing as 2 number 10s. He grabbed so many games and won so many games by the scruff of the neck for Spurs. He was excellent in that number 10 position. And he's done so many interviews where he's kind of come out and said, look, when I was at Juve and when I was at Atalanta, this is where I wanted to play. This is where I feel like I'm best. It's not that I can't play on the wing, but I definitely think it suits me more playing inside. So I think he's kind of made that spot his own. And throughout pre-season and throughout points, like I said, last season, it kind of became really hard to ignore him, playing him there. So that's one of the main things that Ange has changed, and the position of the fullbacks as well. And I think that's brought more out of Johnson as well, and brought more out of Son as well when he has been fixed. I think sometimes in this system, Son can struggle a bit as that touchline winger, but when he's got his fullback and a doggy going round him a little bit more, it means he can come inside into more central positions where he's a lot more deadly, especially at his age in 32. But with Maddison, it's been a really interesting one with Maddison this season, because his role has changed a lot. And he's been asked to do a lot more off the ball now. Last season, where he was playing predominantly more as that number 10, a lot of the creative responsibility was on him. It was kind of everything sort of had to go through him. Whereas Kulusevski coming into the team has taken Kulusevski coming into midfield has definitely taken a lot of the weight off of his shoulders. And I do think that there was this perception of him when he was at Leicester, because he was an out-and-out 10 playing behind Vardy, had the wingers alongside him, that he was a goals and assist man. He was, to be fair, like he was putting up great numbers every single year. So I think when people look at Maddison now and see that that's kind of changed in his game, they see it maybe as a negative thing. Whereas I think for Spurs, definitely this season, he's getting deeper. He's linking up the plays, combining. He's almost become a little bit, and this is not a comparison in terms of quality or consistency, but when we had Luka Modric, someone who would sit that little bit deeper in midfield and just dictate, just kind of slow the game down, play it at their pace, he's become much more of a playmaker for Spurs this year rather than a number 10, like a proper output man. And I think that maybe people get confused about what he is as a player, but I actually think it's making the team better. Don't get me wrong, I do think, like you said at the start, there are games in which he can go missing a little bit, and that does frustrate me. But I do think playing in this position, I do think we might see a more consistent Maddison over the course of the season, because that was kind of my gripe with him last year, even if it means that the numbers aren't as impressive as they were at Leicester, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, at home, this game does slightly worry me a little bit that we're playing you away.
Yeah.
Because I think at home you are very, very dynamic, really fluid. The away form's not as good. Where do you think that sort of... We're on about consistency. Like, if I said one of the big things about Villa is that we're super consistent.
Yeah.
We're going on an 11-game unbeaten run. We don't really lose that many. Away from home, we've done really well this season. But do you think there maybe needs to be just like a little bit of an adaptation of the style, or do you think that's just not going to happen? Because Ange's obviously quite structured on how he wants to do things. Like he wants to attack. Like there's sometimes where you can just hear him on the touchline, and there's those little clips of when he was at Celtic, and he's like screwing at the team because they're like not passing it forward. So do you think there is a bit of an away problem, or do you think it's just something that, like, the Premier League's so difficult that every game's tough?
Yeah, every game is tough. It's kind of become a little bit of a cliche about there's no easier games, but it's a cliche because it's true. Like that, yeah, that's like many kind of cliches. But I do think, look, I'm fully behind Postecoglou and kind of what he's trying to do. I love the style, but I think that does, especially away from home. Like our away record kind of speaks for itself. It's been pretty dire in the last, not necessarily 12 months, but definitely this calendar year. We've won 5 games away from home. One of them was at Villa Park. One of them was at Old Trafford. One of them we scraped past Coventry in the Cup, in which we didn't deserve it. One was against Ferencvaros in the Europa League, and one was Sheffield United away on the final game of the season. So there's a lot of losses in there, or a lot of draws where we just haven't looked anywhere near as convincing. And maybe that's down to his kind of live by the sword, die by the sword approach in terms of this is the way we're going to play. And I think that was kind of borne out on Sunday. Whereas it's difficult really because at the start of the season, when we went to Leicester, again, Leicester have just been promoted. They are going to be in a relegation battle this season. So we should be beating Leicester regardless of whether we're playing pragmatic counter-attacking football or whether we want to go and suffocate them and win the game that way. So we should be winning that. So that's not, there's no excuse there really. But, the way we played in that first half, we can go and dominate teams and go and dominate the ball away from home. Newcastle was another great example of that, where I don't know how we lost that game. So at the start, I think, although it wasn't helping Angie's away record, those were games that we should have picked up points in, and he was maybe let down by the quality of the finishing or those kind of things. Whereas I look at Palace on Sunday, and Palace hadn't won a game all season, and I think we kind of almost turned up there with that attitude a little bit of like, we just play our way and we'll go and win this game. But Palace was so intense in their press in the first kind of phase and the second phase, winning the ball back on not on the edge of our own box necessarily, even that's kind of where the goal came from. They were winning it back in that second phase between the halfway line and kind of just in the kind of final third. They were so aggressive, and we just we weren't able to cope with it. And one thing that has been a bit of a bugbear for me, and it certainly was on Sunday, is that Spurs have not taken a long goal kick all season. We play out from the back all the time, without fail, all the time. And I don't have a problem with that, because I think, with the quality of players that we've got playing out from the back, and Romero, who sometimes has his defensive faults and has done this season, but he's a brilliant line-breaking passer, excellent at kind of carving space. Basuma's so press resistant at times in that number 6. Van der Ven as well, able to run at speed up the pitch. I don't have a problem with us playing out from the back, because that's how we're going to get joy. But sometimes you've got to remember that when you've got a team that will impress you with intent to see, obviously you will probably come and do that on Sunday as well, make it difficult with the likes of Watkins, who will be in your face. You got to remember that you've got a 6'3" target man striker in Dom Solanke up the pitch sometimes. And you've got to go and maybe, that's one thing I have a frustration with Ange about this live by the sword, die by the sword approach in terms of playing out from the back, is that you've got to play to your strengths a little bit when you're under pressure. And remember that because we had a chance in the first couple of minutes of that second half on Sunday. And I don't know how many people who were watching this would have watched the game, because obviously it wasn't on TV. But we had a chance where, like I said, Palace were pressing us really intensely in the first half, win the ball back quite a lot. Second half, we have a goal kick that gets taken short, and Romero hits it into Solanke, brings the ball down, fights off one centre-back. Maddison wins the second ball, back into Solanke, and we're in, and we play, and we should have scored. Played it into Johnson, cut across to Kulusevski, and the keeper saves it. So you got to remember sometimes that you can become a little bit predictable in that way. So that's a bit of a frustration. And look, the away record is what it is. It massively needs to improve. And I think that can come from finding a way to win games ugly. And I think the problem is that I can understand, even though I don't necessarily feel this way about Ange, because I do think in the long term, I think things are going to work, but you can understand why people might feel it's like a little bit style over substance, because we don't really have an ability to kind of win another way. I don't think it's about not having a plan B, because I think that's been a kind of a bit of a lazy criticism of Ange at times, because I think our plan B is more in terms of the personnel rather than the style. I think we've got a lot of players that can come on, like Sarr did it against West Ham last weekend and affect the game just like that, and gave us a little bit more of a pragmatic approach. So, but we still kind of played in the same way, but it just completely altered the game state, made it more transitional. We just picked West Ham off. So yeah, it's got the consistency is the biggest problem at Spurs, because when we've got to find out the reason as to why when we're good, we're great. When we're bad, it's awful. And there seems to be no real middle ground. But these things take time. It's a young squad, and I'm convinced, hopefully, that we will get there. But you've got to be prepared. It's going to take a bit of time, I think.
Yeah, and I think sometimes in football, we all want things to happen pretty quickly, don't we? Because
Yeah,
we
exactly.
know that managers don't get time. And I think at both of our clubs, like Emery's literally like transformed Villa. And I think Angie's having to do the same at Spurs as well. And I think the whole like mentality thing of he's trying to make you winners. And I think sometimes it's not an easy thing to do, really. So Solanke, new signing. And I know you can obviously talk about good strikers because you've had Harry Kane. So I'm sure you know how to judge a striker. So how do you think Solanke's doing? Like, how's he featuring in your system?
I think he's been great. I think he's been great. Look, I think he's only scored 3 goals so far, 2 of them in the league, 1 in the Europa League. So I do think people who might not watch us as much will think, well, you spent 60 odd million pounds on him. Surely you want a little bit more. But I think he's made us a much better rounded attack. His pressing is brilliant. That's kind of one of the main reasons why we bought him. And again, people will kind of come back to that and say, well, you spent 60 odd million pounds on a striker. You want more than that. But you look at the goals that he has scored, finding himself in the right position off of rebounds or from a corner at United, like he might score tap-ins, he might score easy goals. And I think his actual finishing when he gets into positions that you'd expect Harry Kane to just bury, that's something that needs to improve. But that's where you can't compare those two in Kane and Solanke, because Kane was just another level. But in terms of his all-round game, I've been so impressed with him. And I think, look, I don't want to go as far as to say Spurs have replaced Kane, but the reason why I feel like we might be getting to that point is because I don't worry about him on the pitch. Whereas like other strikers that we've signed, not necessarily since Kane, because he's the only one we actually have signed. But in the past, like when we had Soldado and we've spent big money on strikers, basically anyone kind of pre or post Kane, you're looking at them with so much scrutiny because you have to spend big money for a striker usually to, strikers cost a lot of money, right? So naturally there's more scrutiny and more pressure. But with Solanke, even though the goals haven't come in like a real abundance yet, in terms of his overall play, when you watch him, he's got a lot of Kane about him in terms of that ability to win duels. His passing is very crisp. Richarlison was great for us last season when he hit the ground running and actually played consistently as that number 9. And he'll be scrappy and win things in the box and score scrappy goals. Whereas Solanke, everything that he does is so much smoother. His hold-up play is excellent. Whereas Richarlison, a lot of the time last season, despite the fact that he worked so hard, a lot of the times it would just bobble off of him. It'd bounce off of him. His touch isn't as crisp. Whereas Solanke is a really good mobile footballer that makes us so dangerous on transition, because like West Ham last weekend, for example, didn't get a goal involvement, although he was so unlucky not to score near the end of the game before he got taken off. But he was the key to that attack a lot of the time, because he will drop a lot deeper, like Kane used to do for Spurs, kind of be the deepest of that front 5, really, allowing Johnson and Son to run in beyond him. And he can kind of feed those balls, win those 50-50s on the halfway line, and then we can play off of him and play through him almost. So look, I do want I want his box presence to improve. I want the goals to continue to get. I want him to score more goals. But I think in terms of his overall play, I've been really, really pleased so far, and I think he's probably the close. Look, we could have gone and bought maybe Victor Gyökeres or someone like that in the summer. Whether we could have got him, who knows? But spent equivalent sort of money to what we spent on Solanke and go and get a proven out-and-out bagsman, really. But they're very hard to come by. You never know. Gyökeres could have come to the Premier League and stunk the place out. It just is what it is. It's one of those things. Whereas Solanke, proven option, although it's only kind of been a couple of seasons, has been excellent. Was excellent for Bournemouth for a long time. His pressing, his hold-up play, his link-up play is kind of perfect for the way we want to play. And it feels like we've actually got a proper striker. Whereas last season it was like, we'll play Sonny there. He's a great finisher, but how can we feed him? Richarlison, again, we look better with Richarlison as that number 9, but again, he's not a proper goal scorer. Hasn't got the touch of someone like a Solanke, maybe. So I feel like we've got our man, and I do think the goals will come.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a top player for you, and he'll probably end up getting around 20. I think he'll get around 20 this season for sure. Yeah. So finally, then, thoughts on Villa, and then how do you feel like this game is going to go?
It's such a tough one to predict, because one of my biggest, like when we think back to last season and that kind of race for the Champions League, obviously we beat you at Villa Park and we played really well that day. But we were better against you at home. I don't know how we did not win that game at home last year. And that came at a time where we had a lot of injuries as well. That was I think it was about a week after the Chelsea game where everything just fell apart for Spurs, and Romero was banned and Van de Ven was injured and Maddison was injured. I think Brian Hill played in that game against you guys. And I think Son had the ball in the back of the net 3 times, got caught offside marginally. Again, your high line is obviously something that's obviously very impressive and catches a lot of teams out. So off the basis of that, and obviously the performance at Villa Park, I know we can get at you and I know we can hurt you. But you guys just have that ability to, like I was kind of saying about Spurs, like that we don't have, is when things, because I do think there'll be moments. Look, I could see you beating us on Sunday. I could see us beating you. I think it's such a hard one to actually predict, because when we play at our best, we are excellent and can blow any team away. But again, same applies for you guys. But I think what Villa have got that Spurs don't have right now is I could just see it going the way where we're on top of you. Martinez is making saves. We're getting in behind you. We're hurting you. But Villa just hang in there and you get a couple of goals, either from a set piece, maybe on the break or something like that. And it's just, you've got that ability to really hang in games and be a bit more pragmatic and kind of not shot, because you don't do that, but just that's you've got solidity about you. Whereas I think it's a bit like if we were boxers, I think we'd be a bit more box office, but our chin's exposed. Whereas you guys are just a bit more of the kind of all-round package, which is what we want to be. But I've got a lot, like I said earlier, I've got a lot of admiration for Villa, despite the fact that I think that us and you guys are going to be competing for a lot of the same stuff in the next few years, and certainly were last season. We are kind of a rival by the just in terms of the table now. But it's always going to be a good game, I think, when we play each other. I think for the neutral on Sunday, it's going to be quality. And like I said, I do think we can hurt you, but yeah, I've got a lot of respect for, like I said earlier in the video about like the squad building that you guys have done. Not just with like Emery, I think gets so much credit, and rightly so, for his coaching ability. But with like Monchi and the players that you brought in and done smart deals and all that kind of stuff, it's just like you're such a well-run club. And yeah, but in terms of the game on Sunday, I really hope we can win, because I know we can. But there's a lot of pressure going into the game, because, like I said earlier, it's a big week for Ange. But if I had to give a prediction, I'd probably, Hart would say would beat you 2-1, but I'd probably say a score draw. I think maybe 2-2. I think.
Yeah, I think like you say, I think it's going to be tough, because you're at home, and how if you were to play prime Spurs under Ange, you can blow anyone away. But I imagine that Villa are going to, like you probably you've described it really. We're going to start off sitting there a little bit, try and defend really well, grow into it, probably sort of try and exploit your back two if the fullbacks are going on a little bit, and try and nick some. Probably similar to last season as well.
Season,
really.
yeah, that's exactly what it was last year.
Yeah, because I think when you beat us at Villa Park, we were sort of like starting to run on empty, and we had a bad second half, didn't we? Because we were going 0-0 at half time.
0-0. Yeah, you had a few chances in the first half. And then I remember Watkins got in behind a couple of times, and then we went bang bang really quickly at the start of the second, and then McGinn got sent off, and then the game was kind of done. But the home game at White Hart Lane was just like, I came away from that so deflated, because it was just like I thought we battered you, but we just couldn't. Martin's kind of an immovable object, and obviously again your high line was so disciplined, and yeah, like I said, I think Son had a hat trick of offside goals. But yeah, just got to take our chances. Got to take our chances on Sunday.
You found a new pantomime villain as well, didn't you? That game, Matty Cash.
Matty Cash, Matty Cash, and yeah, we did. Yeah, if I speak about that man, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah, so I imagine he's going to get booed at the weekend if he plays. But right, mate. It's been great chatting to you. I really enjoy your content anyway. So I'll tag you in the title and description as well. So Villa fans can check your content out on socials and stuff as well, mate.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed it. And all the best for Sunday. Nice one.
Cheers, mate.
Nice one.